Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Michael Gaudet. How are you, Mike?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing, Tyler?
Good, man. Thanks for coming on. The world conspires. 1 degree of... I think we were at a Christmas party and anyways, here we are. And I do love Calgary, the biggest small town ever, as we were joking about before we hit record it. And you and I have had a couple chances to hang out. And I'm really curious to learn more about the world. Well, you're a fellow marketer, so we'll start with that. But you live in this very cool fractional world, which we're going to unpack a little bit. So you are the principal at 80/20 CMO. So why don't we just start, jump in the elevator, let us in the tent, whatever metaphor you want to use. What's 80/20 all about? What do you do? What problems do you solve in the world? And let's launch from there.
Yeah, so I'm a solopreneur. So 80/20 CMO, I guess I am the 80/20 CMO is what I'm sort of telling people. And basically the idea is that, everybody's heard the 80/20 rule, the Pareto principle in economics, that sort of idea. So, 20% of your efforts are leading to 80% of your results. That's what I sort of saw from a marketing perspective in terms of my career and that sort of thing. So basically, I try to focus from a fractional perspective on that 20% that's really going to yield the results. So I operate with only 2 companies at a time, maximum. And I provide fractional marketing leadership for them. That's basically it to get to their short-term, medium-term, long-term objectives. That's kind of the idea. And I've been doing that for about 4 years now.
Nice. How many different companies? So has that been, because I think every 12 weeks is the length of kind of an engagement with you. So that's two companies on a 12-week cycle. And then typically another 2 companies will start right after that, like in a perfect world?
Yeah, what I've been doing, I've been fortunate enough where I have 2 12-week engagements in the fall. I take a break at the winter time, just for holidays, that sort of thing. And then 2 in the winter and 2 in the spring. And then I don't have any engagements in the summer. So I'm kind of like a teacher, except
you're like a university professor who's
except
still working.
I only yell at 2 kids. I don't yell at 30. So
fair enough.
That's sort of how I've
I'm
sort
sure
of
there's a few war
it.
stories which we might get into before the end of the call. And what I love about what you do is also how focused you are and very specific your ideal customer profile is. So talk to us a little bit about, who do you work with? Who do you provide the most value to? And then maybe a little bit how you landed on that.
Yeah, so the bullseye of who I work with, it's very specific. It's what I term as a hyper niche sort of thing. So basically, who I provide the most outsized value to are B2B SaaS companies. So software as a service companies. I shouldn't assume everybody knows the acronyms. Marketing's littered with them. So B2B SaaS companies that have raised between $3 and $15 million of venture capital or family office money. So it's very specific, and even the implication of them having raised $3 or $15 million in the last 12 months and that sort of thing, that most of the time means that they have product market fit, for example, and they're ready to scale. So that's the use case, is essentially they have that in place, they're B2B SaaS, and now they're really, really looking to scale. And, how did I land on that? Basically, and it's interesting, and we can get into this later, but I'm constructing a course on sort of how to sort of do fractional. So I'm revisiting this in my mind right now. And basically what I tried to do was come up with, what am I the best at in Calgary, or near the best at in Calgary? And I really had to be that specific to get to something where I could actually walk in a room and not, I
appreciate the confidence and humility equally balanced in that statement.
Kind of thing, right? It's like, what could I walk in a room and be like, yeah, I'm generally the best at in this city kind of idea. And I had to be that specific to do it. And that's fun because I can provide more value, which I really, really like doing. And it's more fun to work on things where you can do that. Obviously there's also, sort of a play here in the sense of like, if I'm the best at something, then the negotiations go a bit different. The leverage is a little bit different. I could be a bit more picky about who I partner with and who I don't partner with, right? So that's part of the logic of it. And I'm a big believer from a fractional perspective. It's becoming more crowded as a space, more awareness of fractional, which is great. So the pie's growing, but there's more people trying to capture pieces of it. So I'm a big believer in there's room for everybody. I'm just a big believer in folks, really, really concentrating at what they're fantastic at. And that's going to mean providing the most value for businesses, right?
I love it. And the discipline and the confidence it requires to do that. What are your top no fly zones? Like think about the last couple of clients you respectfully, but firmly said no to. What are some of the things that show up for you that are like, okay, no, that's just that classroom, back to your analogy, it's just too messy. There's just too much going on. Or is there other factors? I'm just curious what closes your door?
Yeah. So no, that's a great question. And what I would say, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think back at the other episodes I've listened to of the Collisions podcast, if there's any swearing. So I'll just say no a-holes.
It's a green light. This is grown-up rules, Mike. Grown-up rules.
Okay. So, well, I'll say it. No assholes. That's basically policy number one, right?
Yep.
If I'm having a conversation and I sense that, hey, like, would I want to go out for a beer with this person, that sort of thing. Then yeah, like, that's a bar that you need to sort of cross. And then another one that's very big and it might not, be super apparent to folks or obvious is that if there's an inputs orientation to the person's way of thinking. And what I mean by this, if people are thinking about like, well, how many hours are you going to dedicate? And, what does that kind of look like, and they're reverse calculating what an effective cost per hour is of my time and that sort of thing. And they're not focused on the outcomes and the investment that's required for the outcomes and the ROI that's associated to that. Then we're probably most likely not going to get along very well, right? Because the idea of hours, what that does is just sort of commoditizes your time, right? Because like, I'll be honest to everybody that's listening to this podcast, I am not the cheapest fractional CMO for sure. I'm probably fairly, I would say expensive, but that's probably a misnomer just in terms of the value that's provided.
Expensive
right?
is a relevant term, right?
Yeah.
If I spend $1 and you get me 50 cents outcomes, you're expensive. I spend $1 and I spend $100 and you get me $1 million outcome. Well, you're the cheapest $100 I ever spent.
Exactly. Right.
That is marketing a little. Well, it's business investment in general, right?
Yeah. So that sort of thing. If people see it from an investment orientation, then we're going to have a good time and we're going to get some great results and it's going to be awesome. If they see it from a strict cost sort of orientation, then it's probably not going to work out very well. So that's another thing that I watch out for as well in the conversations.
That makes a ton of sense. So thinking about also these companies and where they are in their journey, all of a sudden they bring in a fractional CMO. Are you at the leadership? Are you at the executive table? And I say that in the context of, are you helping them understand ROI on, what is our cost for this versus we're going to invest because we've got to put this money into play. We've got to turn this money into results. That's what we got the investment for. Are you also helping raise the bar just on the sophistication around the role marketing plays from a financial perspective at the table, not just the tactics of what the company might now start doing in market?
Yeah, and I'll explain a little bit about the process. It might be helpful. So
the
first month of the process or the engagement, so weeks 1 to 4, is essentially spent doing discovery, is what I sort of term it as. And the first week of those conversations is with the executive sponsor of the engagement. The executive sponsor is sort of the highest title that exists at the company that has sales and marketing accountability. So most of the time with the companies I'm working with, given stage and that sort of thing, it is the CEO. But it can be the CRO or Chief Revenue Officer in some cases as well, or a VP of Sales and Marketing, that sort of idea. And a big reason for that is that, the company, and this is another sort of watch out, that sort of thing. If a company's viewing marketing in a silo and sales in a silo, that's probably not going to be a good time. And I mean that not only in terms of my engagement, but I mean that in terms of like this company's viability to generate revenue in a meaningful fashion in a scalable way.
Are you seeing, under that context, and I was going to, are you seeing more CRO titles showing up in some of these companies you're working with? Because again, reading or being, exposed to literature over the last bunch of years, a title that tended to seem to be more popular south of the border, maybe a little less in Canada, maybe even a little less in Western Canada. Are you seeing that realization through that role starting to exist more often?
Yeah, I mean, I do see it often enough. I think part of it is B2B SaaS and sort of following in the footsteps of what the US companies have done and that sort of thing.
There's kind of a playbook there, right, to follow?
Yeah, so, and I would say most often it's the CEO that I'm collaborating with. Okay. CRO, most of the time is sort of a later thing that they might bring in. It might be with a company that's raised more of that 15 rather than the 3 million. Having that CRO in place. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, no, what I love about your process is that also for anyone listening, it's just thinking about how to also get your marketing organized, whether you bring in a fractional CMO or not. Thinking about who needs to be involved, what needs to be at the table, what conversations come first, what conversations come second. Because oftentimes in my role, you get pulled in and you're like, "Whoa, we're having the wrong conversation. We're way over here, but we haven't had any of this conversation in the start or the middle. We're jumping right to the end. We're jumping to a tactics conversation, right?"
It's so funny because basically, often enough, what happens is, you're having that initial conversation before an engagement, that sort of thing, just understanding what they sort of need or what they believe they need. And often enough, it's like, we need leads. That's what we need. We need leads and that. 100%. And you sort of dig a little bit underneath the surface and it's like, okay, well, you have no way to track leads. You have no way to understand who's working the leads, how effective is that outreach effort, all that sort of stuff. It's like, you want more water in the funnel, but you have a ton of holes in the funnel. So how about we fix the holes in the funnel first, and then we'll put a bunch of water in? How about that? So just, and that sort of investment from an ROI perspective is a lot more beneficial to the company rather than just putting more water in, right? But back to your question about how we sort of engage from a marketing executive perspective and that sort of thing. Basically, that first week of conversations during the discovery is with the CEO or the executive sponsor. Most of the time is the CEO. And that is nailing down the business goals. So what do the business goals look like for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever is sort of a meaningful time frame that they're operating within, right? And that's important, right? Because you need to nail down the business goals and understand them and sort of stress test them to some degree before you do the marketing goals. Because the marketing goals, like in my opinion, should ladder up to the business goals, right?
More times than not that I'm like, marketing is in service of the business, not the other way around, right? And sometimes I think that gets forgotten. Like, marketing is a plug-in to help you execute on this thing that you've laid out. If that's not clear, it's really hard to point to something and say that's a good or bad idea in marketing. Mm-hmm. No, I find though it happens so often.
No, it's true. 1,000%. And so basically we nail down those business goals. Often enough though, what needs to happen is that they've come up with a business goal whereby it's like, okay, well, we did 3 million in annual recurring revenue this year. We're going to do 10 this year, right? Because
dartboard goal setting is real. Yeah. Totally.
And that sort of thing, right? And this is, top-down sort of goal setting happens often enough. And so basically in that week, one thing I try to bring to it, and sometimes I end up being a fractional CRO, call it a third of the time, but basically, doing that bottom up sort of analysis of like, okay, well, basically, in order to get to that goal, what would we need to do from a lead generation perspective, pipeline generation perspective, the movement through the pipeline in terms of, sales cycle length, all that, what would that look like? And how do we get to goal here? What are the levers that we could sort of pull here? So, often enough, what might happen is that the goal might be a little too lofty, even with the additional investment. So saying, hey, 10 is impossible, but here's how we get to 8. Here's how we go from 3 to 8 in a way that, we could feel confident in. We could present a bottom-up plan that gets us there, that sort of idea, right? So essentially just taking it out of the sort of executive ether and bringing it down to earth. That's kind of been a bit of my role in that first week, is sort of getting to that understanding, solidifying the business goal.
Typically that information, that data that you need about the length of sale, is that data available, or is that often part of one of the challenges you run into?
Yeah, and that's a great...
you need quite a raft of information to go, okay, now I can actually go, this is how many at the top, to be this many at the middle, to be this long, to reach here with an average sale and lifetime value. There's a lot of data that it sounds very succinct. There's a lot of data points that sometimes are kind of garbage on those journeys.
No, and understanding where the gaps exist from a data perspective, I mean, that's absolutely key. And it's key, for a number of reasons, because often enough, the goals of these companies is to raise a subsequent round at a higher valuation. So that's a goal. And if you're going into a venture capital office and you're saying, hey, here's my numbers. I really have no data validated ways to sort of progress leads or understand them, or my pipe, your valuation is going to be much lower than if you're saying, hey, Here's 2-3 years of data. Here's how we forecast. Here's how we hit the forecast. Here's and essentially what it is, because I mean, venture capitalist folks are very nice and that sort of thing, but they're kind of bankers, right? And it's like money in.
They're not there just
out.
To be nice. They're not. If they're being nice, that's part of. There's a strategy with an outcome. I was working with a VC and he said, we're not nice to be nice. We're nice because we think it's a better way to get work done, or to get better outcomes. But we still need to get the outcome, right? Like don't mistake nice just for the sake of it, or something to that. It was like, no, we're being nice because we believe it's actually strategically more valuable to us, which I appreciated his black and white version of nice.
No, 100%. And so basically, like having the data in place is actually thing one. So establishing that sort of thing. And if the data is not in place, that's okay. And often enough, it's. I can't think of one, and I've worked with 14 companies so far, over the past 4 years in this kind of format, that sort of thing. There's not been one company where I've gotten to and said, wow, like everything in terms of your data, hygiene, logic associated to it, CRM setup, customer relationship management software setup, that sort of thing. It's all really, really, really the best. And that's okay. And that's something that we address. And most of the time it is something that we address within that 12-week cycle, because it's thing one. If you can't measure it, how do you know it's actually being effective in terms of your marketing efforts, sales efforts, that sort of thing?
How much, just as marketers in general, speaking very broadly, the plumbing, like that need to have a real deep understanding of how the technology all bolts together with so many disparaging systems oftentimes. And it isn't one system to rule them all. They're all bolted together. There's mailer twine, there's duct tape, there's chicken wire wrapped around stuff. Like, as marketers today, also, where do you see that trend of really having to understand or be able to at least speak to the plumbing? I'm using that term a bit loosely, before you can even talk about whether you were being quote unquote successful as a marketer or not.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I was actually just chatting with a former team member of mine yesterday, and he's at a bit of a crossroads in his career, that sort of thing. I won't mention who it was and that sort of thing. But basically he's like, hey, should I go and get more into digital marketing? Should I go into RevOps? Or you mentioned a bit of an off-color one, which is just like, hey, maybe I'll go into real estate, that sort of idea. And basically what I said to him is that I think the greatest growth area that exists in marketing from a specialist perspective, as well as like a strategic perspective, I think it's RevOps. I think it's underinvested, and revenue operations is what I'm talking about here. So the plumbing, managing the plumbing, the reporting, all that sort of stuff, the integration of the various technologies and in order to drive growth, right? And that is just such an underinvested area, right? And even companies that have raised, 8-9 million, they don't even have one person managing RevOps. It's sort of on the side of multiple people's desks on multiple teams. That results in this sort of siloed dog's breakfast approach to measurement, which is not what the VCs want to see. Pro tip.
It's hard to, you want me to trust you, but yet I don't see anything trustworthy at this time.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. And other parts, are we seeing that in other parts, other jurisdictions, whether we'll just pick US, south of the border, or even globally? Oftentimes I've heard from marketers, and sometimes I think we are hard on ourselves, and maybe we should be, that, we're a bit behind here in Western Canada. Like, other places, other jurisdictions, that's a little bit more focused on. Kind of with your optics looking out, beyond our little island we all live on here in Western Canada. Is it a bit of a phenomenon, or do you say have you seen that to be a little bit more universally true everywhere you've kind of bumped into?
I mean, I'm like you, I'm not from Alberta, but, Alberta's home. I've been here for, 17 years, met my wife here, all that sort of stuff. So I love Alberta. I love Calgary, great places to be. That being said, like, I have to be honest, when I'm talking to a company that's based in San Francisco or Austin, chances are they are actually going to be more amenable to these sort of ideas, right? This idea of like, hey, you need to invest in this RevOps area that isn't directly driving revenue, but with the insights that are provided, that will drive the revenue, right? From the teams and that sort of thing. So, I'd love to say that, we are playing at that same level and that sort of thing, but, we're not quite there yet. And, we're a more nascent market. I mean, we're the third largest, I think, tech market right now when you look at VC investment in Canada. Mm-hmm. And that's good. And there's been crazy growth, right? In tech in Calgary and in Alberta.
The last 5 to 10 years it had been, even when I started this podcast, the conversations, all the there wasn't a Venn diagram, there were just a bunch of circles, but over the last few years, they've come closer and closer together. There's more overlap. The community's gotten larger. There's more money and more players than there was even not that long ago, pre-COVID. Mm-hmm.
I think a big thing though, and this is something I try to sort of live myself is, be humble. We've come a long way. I've come a long way as a professional, whatever, but there's more to be done. There's more learning to be had. There's always better, like that sort of thing. So we'd be remiss if we rest on our laurels at this point.
That's a slow death. That's a slow death.
Yeah. We're not there in any way. We've made good progress. Let's be proud of that. But let's not fool ourselves in that, thinking that we are the best tech market, even in Canada, right?
Yeah, I appreciate humility, a little humility, while also having a get her done attitude is a nice Alberta combination typically. Yep. We touched on it earlier. I want to circle back on it. Fractional, just the term. I'm seeing it show up everywhere. I'm seeing it a couple different ways from a couple different angles. I love it. I think it's very valuable to companies to have access, but I'm also seeing it as a bit of this need case where I'm also seeing older, more senior individuals not being able to land those full-time gigs, and maybe they're high price, high ticket. I don't know. I'm seeing a balance of things kind of pushing towards it. So I know you're investing and kind of leaning in on like how to do fractional well. Talk to me about some of the drivers that you think are maybe contributing, good, bad, or indifferent. Maybe good or bad is an incorrect label to put on it. But what are some of the things that are driving fractional? And then let's get into why it can be a real strength for an organization to have access to that. Sure.
So basically, and the reason why and we can talk more about it later, but the reason why I'm launching this course on how to do fractional and that sort of thing, how to do it well, how to provide outsized value, how to sort of change your life, because it changed my life in terms of what I was able to sort of do and the lifestyle that I want for myself and my family. So, I mean, that's cool. But basically the reason I'm doing this is that the amount of demand that I've seen for folks that are reaching out and say, hey, Mike, I've heard that you're doing fractional and it's going pretty well and that sort of thing. I'd like to talk to you about that because I'm interested in sort of jumping in. It's probably 10x the amount of demand that I get from hey, Mike, can you help us out with our marketing? So I've had probably about 100 conversations over the past 2 years. In the past 2 years is when it's really ramped up, I found.
Interesting. Okay. So from a trending perspective, it's hot and trending up.
Oh yeah.
I'm running it the last 6 months. You and I met before Christmas and I was aware of it. I knew some people in Toronto. Then all of a sudden it's like I'm one after another. I'm meeting people that are like, oh, I want to do fractional XYZ. I don't think any of them have been marketing. There's been product. There's been tech startup leadership, like all kinds of different subsects.
Yeah. So it's the use cases or the stories, I should say, of folks that have come to me and I've chatted with them and that sort of thing. I try to reserve a bit of time on Fridays to have those conversations. Doors always open. The community's been good to me. I want to be good to the community. That sort of idea, right? Pay it forward. You've seen the movie. Haley Joel Osment.
Yeah.
But basically, like what I've seen is there's a couple stories, right? There's one story that's, hey, I've been grinding at the, director, VP, C-suite level. And I've been putting in, 60, 70, 80 hour weeks, for a long time. And, COVID's been a bit of a shake for me in terms of realizing, hey, like I want to do things a little bit differently. I want to be more deliberate, being more open to the idea of working remotely or hybrid, that sort of idea. That's really, sort of shaking people up. And I know I started my practice right at the beginning of COVID. It was
you were already on the path and then COVID showed up, or was it kind of...
No. I got on the path due to COVID.
Okay.
I started essentially. I was working. I was leading the marketing for a venture builder called Harvest, and helped launch Neo Financial, that sort of thing. Help them get the Series A. But basically, I started working from home. And I was never a work from home person. I was always going to the office, maybe a little bit overly disparaging of the folks that are like, oh, well, you're going to work from home, that sort of thing. I start working from home and I realize I'm like, wow, I'm able to bring wife to my or bring coffee to my wife. I'm able to
make midday espressos for the absolutely. You just described my wife and I. My wife went back to work and I miss her.
Yeah,
I love making her coffee during the middle of the day.
So I realized that I really liked it, and I was able to sort of focus. That's been a bit of a superpower of mine for a good number of years. So I'm just like, man, this really works. So I can do this. So that my story is similar to the ones
forced experiment, right? COVID for so many years.
and so people are looking to do things differently, and what I see is that a lot of people have developed great skill sets, but they've been in roles whereby they've had to do a number of different things over those 80-hour weeks and that sort of thing. And so just even on those calls, asking them, and this is, part of the course is figuring this out, but what are you passionate about? Like, what do you really, when you go to work, what are the things that you really, really, really love and that sort of thing? And most of the time they coincide with the things where you're adding a ton of value, right? And you are uniquely able to sort of provide. So,
so it really comes down to that, because core competencies are often the things you take for granted that you're like, oh, doesn't everybody do it this way? You're like, no, actually you do it different because it's kind of your secret sauce. It's kind of your thing. And even when it's talking with an organization, you get into core competencies, and it's often those things that are outsized in terms of what they are actually have as a superpower that sometimes aren't obvious because you're too close to it.
Yeah, no, completely. And so that's one of the things, people looking to sort of get more balance in their life, have more meaningful work, that sort of idea. So that's a big driver of what that's pulling people towards fractional. Another thing too, frankly, and this is more of the cynic in me and that sort of thing, is, well, you lost your job. Because and especially in tech, there has been dramatic sort of cutbacks. VCs, there's half the checks being written than there were 2.5 years ago. That sort of thing, right? So that has a ripple effect. More focus on getting to EBITDA positive, less on top line revenue growth. That sort of idea.
Less than just getting to the next pitch deck. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, there's been cutbacks, right? And so folks that are out of work, they essentially say, okay, well, I'll hang up my shingle and I'll say I'm a fractional sort of person.
Yeah.
And that looks better on LinkedIn than me having a gap, right?
Then it just says open to opportunity. Yeah.
And it says, the green halo kind of thing, right? So I mean, a lot of people are using it as sort of a stopgap in order to provide some income for them and their family and that sort of thing. So I definitely don't begrudge them that, and I think that's a good thing to do. But often enough, they are looking for that next full-time opportunity. And fractional could be a good way towards that. I mean, I know somebody that was in fractional chief client success officer, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And he worked with a client, and basically that client said, hey, like, you're kind of the best. Can we employ you full time? And he said, you know what? I really believe in the mission. I believe in the team. I believe in you, CEO person. I'm going to make that jump. And he made that jump, and it's worked out famously, right?
Well, what an amazing way to de-risk it for everybody, right there, right?
Exactly.
Like, the 3 or 6 month rolling audition, kind of, to a certain extent, right? For all parties.
1,000%. So I mean, those are the two sort of main use cases that I sort of have seen. Is people looking to think about work and life and that balance a bit differently, and COVID being that main sort of catalyst for it. Mm-hmm. Or, it's a transition sort of thing in this time
could be stage of career. It could be a few different factors, right? Who, in your opinion, should never be fractional, should probably stick with a full-time gig? Is there any, I'm thinking about boundaries, I'm thinking about ability to, focus, regulate your own time. Like, again, that radical personal responsibility is a concept that a lot of remote workers just weren't ready for or couldn't. Oh, I love to work remote. Oh, whoa, I have to be completely self-fulfilling in my responsibilities. Is there anyone you run into where you're like, red flag, probably not for you. This might actually not work out for you, let alone not even forget about the companies you work for?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say that if you can't define a hyper niche for yourself, then I actually wouldn't recommend doing it. For example, if you're a marketing generalist and you're saying, hey, I could be your fractional marketing generalist, okay? And going into a company and just doing whatever, you're competing against everybody in the world that can be a marketing generalist, right? So it's red ocean is sort of the expression, right?
Yeah.
Like it's very, very, if you can't be, and I'm not going to say, I won't say the best in a 1 million person catchment area, but if you can't even be, top 50 in that area, you probably shouldn't do it. Because the thing I would say too is that, budgeting probably about a third of your time for things that are not related to direct client work is what you sort of need to do, right? So basically you need to get paid more in that sort of client work in order to compensate for that third of time that you're updating your fresh books, having coffees, promoting yourself on podcasts, hypothetically, like that sort of thing, right? So
time well spent, I would say, but as I have a bias, but
and
you're right. There is things like it's not an employee mindset anymore, and whatever that means to you, hearing that word, it is that you are still running, like you said. I'm the principal, I am the single shingle, but I still have to do all the things. I still have to make sure that my financials get done. I still have to pay my GST. Like there's a whole new set of things you have to do that as a T4 employee, 9 to 5, you don't have to do them. They get quote unquote taken care of for you, but there's a discount. Like it's all about the compensation of time, money, pay, and deliverables, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And
I really appreciate that. And a lot of people don't realize getting into it, and you learn the hard way, like many of us do as entrepreneurs. Like, oh, shit, I didn't expect that, but I guess there was only one way to find out.
Yeah, no, and so if you can't really define that hyper niche, then that's probably a sign that I probably wouldn't recommend Fractional. And the thing is that kind of comes with that is that if you can define a hyper niche in that way, you're more likely to be intermediate or sort of later stage in your career, that sort of thing, in terms of level.
A few more miles on your experience,
and that sort of thing. So
and it's not older, younger. I don't like that term. It's just experience. I've been playing this whatever game we're playing a little bit longer, so I've probably seen more things. That's all it really means to me.
So and it's interesting, right? To be in an area, for example, like RevOps, for example, if somebody has 5 years of super duper solid RevOps experience, that might not sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things.
But in a new sector,
in a new sector, you're expert, right? Like just like and to be frank,
the 10-year veteran.
like Tyler, I'm doing a course on Fractional after 4 years of doing Fractional because it's very rare that people have been doing Fractional for 4 years. Yeah, like that. It's a new area and that sort of idea, right?
I do appreciate sometimes where part of the success definition is actually just sticking with something. Like that shouldn't be underestimated. I just kept doing it, whether it was a good idea or not. I kept doing it and I figured it out because I stayed with the game a little bit longer. And sometimes our society, we jump around a bit before we get to that. Oh, I see where I had to get to now for this to actually make sense.
Yeah, no, totally.
That's a very broad statement, I've realized. So just hyper niches. Obviously, we talked about CRO being one. Any other niches that you see? Because I'm sure people also ask you like, hey, well, forget about what I'm good at. What do you see out there? Like, where's the graph? Like, if I just start to head off in a direction, where am I going to intersect the next need in 6 months or 12 months outside of CRO? Because you called that one out really early.
Yeah. Revenue operations is one, but even beyond like what we're talking about here. So the hyper niche is essentially what is the when you think about the industry, sub-industry, size of company, stage of company, what's the use case that's sort of there in front of you? So basically it's the kind of thing of, like, for example, the use case that I work with, right, is like, it's not just that company that I described, but basically like, I have this written down. It's essentially, they now have product market fit and they are looking to scale and make inbound revenue, a meaningful portion of their revenue mix in order to hit their business goals. Like that's the exact scenario that I'm sort of working with within that hyper niche, right? If they don't have that, if you can't describe that, then again, like it's going to be a harder go because you're going to be competing with many, many more. And so that use case could be anything from, I've chatted with folks and, one of them is that they don't have a UX practice at all. So going in and setting up a UX practice and then, leaving that sort of behind in the sense of you've staffed up appropriately, you've developed the processes appropriately, like all that sort of stuff, right? So it could be whatever is like essentially what it is what are you passionate about? What is there a market demand for? And, would that market demand sort of lead to the kind of compensation, like the value provided, would that be appropriate for you in terms of being able to feed your family and that sort of thing, right? And do well there. So it's that kind of intersecting. You think about those use cases. I mean, I gave you an example there. I mean, it could be, for example, setting up product marketing for a company. That's a function that's very often super neglected or not even there,
and becoming more in demand every day when you just put your ear to the ground at all, right?
For sure. Or even a product function, not even product marketing, a product function within a software environment, that sort of thing, and really professionalizing it there. So, lots of different things that can be done. Like, if you're more of a financial sort of person, like Fractional CFO, which is probably the OG Fractional.
I had a podcast earlier last week with a Fractional CFO, and she's like, "We've been doing this for a while. Like, it's not like, I guess it's cool and it's trendy, but this is not a new thing for our industry to the same degree," is what she said. Actually, yeah.
Yeah. No, and so basically, like, that could be, hey, I help companies get there, like that are $1 million in revenue or more and haven't had sort of much attention on the books and that sort of thing. Get their books in order, get forecasting going, get cash flow statements and all that sort of thing going, get everything in order. And then, staff up appropriately with, maybe it's a controller or something like that, stay on as an advisor. So there's so many different ways to sort of do it, but it needs to be a use case that, businesses would really, 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 really value, right? And you're doing that specific use case, and you're not doing all the other things, that 80% of things, to harken back to the name.
Excellent. Now you brought that back really well. That's an excellent, good marketing storyteller right there. And we loop it all the way back to the name. And let's not forget, when you're growing your business, being able to have clear lines of who to say yes to and who to say no to, that cannot be valued highly enough, because it can get really noisy. You can have 100 coffees, and the entrepreneur in me loves to say yes. That can be a real trap, in the contrast to what you're talking about, is like, yeah, I'd love to help you. Actually, let me refer you to my friend who does exactly what you need. I don't do that. I do this. Yeah. And when you tell that to someone, they're like, oh, yeah, actually, you know what? I know someone who could use exactly, like, the power of being clear is it can't be undervalued.
No, for sure. And that's a super important point. And one thing I should mention, right, is like, and people say like, hey, like, I don't think I know enough businesses of that hyper niche that I would define, and that specific, what I call only choice value proposition kind of thing, meaning that you go into the room, you say,
once they met you, they're like, well, we got to work with these people.
Exactly. And people say, well, I don't know if there's the volume of companies, there's the market demand, like that sort of thing for it. And what I say is that what you've defined is your bullseye. You've defined exactly what the company that you would provide the most outsized value to is, right? And so what that bullseye allows you to do is understand, okay, well, there is actually, let's say it's one level adjacent to the bullseye. Okay, that's a pretty good company to collaborate with. If it's 4 levels removed, then you probably should walk away from that money, right? Yeah. Like, for example, there's companies that I've worked with that weren't B2B SaaS. They were actually a platform play. From a technology perspective, that sort of thing. So, I'm not only working, well, now I'm only working with the bullseye because I'm a bit further along in the journey and that sort of thing. But, starting out, totally understand you need to put food on the table, that sort of thing. But understanding that bullseye that you're really going after will help you understand, okay, which one is sort of a brother or sister of to use another analogy, of the bullseye, which one is, a third cousin that's ugly kind of thing. And also then all of a sudden your criteria of like, oh, okay, well, there's no assholes here. So that moves them they're outcomes oriented. That moves them another point in. Yeah. Like it is a complex algorithm in your brain. But when you're really clear on what your make or breaks are, it's so much easier to find it. I love what you said. It's not about always have to be bullseye, but what am I compromising? And is that worth it? Because the other factors are, oh, great leadership team. I love their energy. I love what they're doing. I can bring to bear my skills to help them, even though it wasn't SaaS in your example. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And there could be strategic sort of imperatives as well, in the sense of like, hey, maybe this isn't right on the bullseye. Maybe it's one level off, but it's for a company that's invested in by this venture capital firm that I'd really like to sort of have a relationship with and that sort of thing, and really do well with this portfolio company in order to work with other portfolio companies sort of within their remit.
Has that been a bit of like thinking about a customer acquisition and growth? A lot of times it can be very intimidating. Like to your point, oh geez, I don't know enough company. I don't know anybody. I've never had to go out and strum up business. Like lots of times that's a real barrier for new entrepreneurs or new business owners or new single consultants. For you, was it about the network that you'd created? Because obviously you've worked in traditional roles for a long time. How much was it about the network? How much was it land and expand with like a venture cap group or somebody where you could have greater reach? What was it? Share a little bit of your playbook with us.
So basically, and this is essentially the steps of the course and that sort of thing.
Oh, nice.
The first thing is essentially defining your goals / constraints, right? So, how much do you want to work a week? Like I knew, for example, I was grinding like, 70, 80 hour weeks previously, that sort of thing. I figured out that I had 30 hours a week in order to be the kind of father I want to be and the kind of husband I want to be. That's what I had to dedicate to work, wholesale. Like that's what I had, right? And basically, time constraints. When do you want to work during the week kind of thing? When can you work during the week? How much vacation do you want? How much compensation do you want? Can that be variable? Are you okay with that? That sort of idea. So figuring out the goals and constraints that you sort of have, that's sort of step one, right? Defining that hyper niche is step two, right? So who do you really, really play well with, produce outsized results for, that sort of thing. And then it's the only choice value proposition. So for that hyper niche, what are you doing for them that is just, they're going to say yes from that first meeting. The dynamics of the meeting is more you interviewing them rather than interviewing you. Like it's sort of to that extent, right? So you figure that out. And then the next step is what I call iterative and collaborative go-to-market. And what I mean by that, and this is all stuff I did, right? Like, so I'm not just, like this is actually just my playbook as you sort of called it. So basically what I did was I had everything that I just mentioned in place. But I sort of considered it as a draft, right? Because I didn't have a client, like that sort of thing. And what I did was I reached out to those that are in my network that, I considered friendly, as people that I really, really trust, respect, that I've worked with previously, that sort of thing. And that's one thing I should mention too, is that this approach works better for, at least mid-career, maybe a little bit north of that. Because if you don't have that network, that's going to be hard in order to sort of iterate and that sort of thing, right? And so what I did was I sort of explained to them, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Here's the model. Here's the hyper niche. Here's how I'm thinking I'm going to provide value in the use case and that sort of thing. What do you think? And this was not BD. This was essentially just like, hey, I thought of this idea. Let me know your thoughts on it. And basically, imagine that I was maybe 80% of the way there in terms of nailing down what I wanted to nail down. That last 20% was through all of those conversations and feedback and iteration with those people that I trust and respect within my network, right? To get it to that 100% and get to a better final product, right? And those people that you're chatting with, like there's the sort of benefit that I didn't think about at the time, but it was really cool in that, they became eyes and ears for me for opportunities that matched to what, I was talking about and that sort of thing. As well, they've kind of co-built the approach with me, right? So there's a sense of kind of quasi ownership that they have.
They saw their reflection. And what's the if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. There's a saying like that floating around. And I appreciate though, like not even contrived on your part, but using your peers, reaching out, looking for your blind spots. Like that's just a good way to get. I'm a think out louder, so I love that approach as well. Because the extrovert in me goes, well, what do you think? Let me know, because something's going to come out of it. Like almost every time something comes out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in my, so I track time, like that's what I do. Like, I'm a bit of a, sort of analysis nerd, that sort of idea. But like, basically like in FreshBooks, the entry that I put, like, I don't have a business development entry. It's just relationships, because that's all it is. Right. So
like, I appreciate calling it what it actually is. Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think I've done, anything that's felt like BD, like in the entire time. Right. It's just like, it's BD, but it's sort of kind of oblique BD, if you will. So,
I get it. It's building relationships. Like, just call it exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes just calling it what it is the best strategy.
Yeah. So basically doing that. And that's how my first client came about, was actually one of those folks. They had somebody in their network that really they thought would benefit from this, introduced me, and then it sort of went from there. And then basically from how do I sort of get clients and that sort of thing? I mean, most of it is just inbound through relationships. And those relationships are, former collaborators of mine, like either, I've worked with them at the same company, or, when I was agency side, that sort of thing, or previous, basically, companies that I've worked with, people that are at those companies from a fractional perspective that I've worked with, they've referred me on because they had a good experience in terms of, collaborating with me.
You've worked at some great
thing.
companies, and everybody fans out, right? And if you've got those relationships and trust, that is part of that. Like you said, being later in your career, you just build up more connections.
Yeah,
especially at some of the companies you worked with. Like, respectfully looking at your LinkedIn, it's a bit of a who's who of kind of what's happened in Calgary or Western Canada the last bunch of years, and all those individuals move around because we're still a big small town. To overuse that joke yet again.
No, for sure. And I mean, another thing that's important too is wherever you are, if you can identify what I call one-to-many sort of relationships. So, for me, venture capital, family office, private equity to some extent, that sort of idea. Like, if you do well by them, they will introduce you to the rest of their portfolio because, they have an incentive to do so, right? So, operating with them is pretty important.
They're often
to me
just
as well.
connectors by their kind of DNA, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it doesn't, and that's what fits for me in terms of one-to-manys. But let's say you service more startups instead of scale-ups and that sort of thing. It might be accelerators for you, in that sort of idea, right? So, whoever you're able to garner those one-to-many relationships with, then that's fantastic. Or maybe most of your markets actually, maybe they're at the Chamber of Commerce or that sort of thing. That could be something whereby you sort of target and build relationships in there.
Well, that's the old, once you know kind of who they are, then you just need to figure out where they're hanging out and then go there, right?
Yeah.
I always joke, if all your customers were at the movie on Friday night, guess what? Advertising in front of that movie would be a really good idea. So to pick this strategy's dead or that strategy's dead, it's like, well, that's not really you that determines that. It's where your customers hanging out and where can you create relevance to them. And it sounds so flippant to say, but once you're like, what's it worth for you to be in that environment? It's the only way. It's let you because you're going to bump into them. I really appreciate. Rewind. It's 4 years ago. Michael's talking to Michael, and you're about to embark on this journey. Any words of, especially with building this course, you're talking to so many people that are like, oh, what's it going to be like? What would you say to you if you were taking your course 4 years ago?
Well, I mean, even before you sort of make the decision to sort of go fractional and that sort of thing, and you're sort of weighing it, that sort of thing. One thing I did was a bit of and this is sort of stealing from startup life and that sort of thing. I sort of constructed what my burn rate kind of looked like, in the sense of, liquid capital that I could deploy in order to buy food and that sort of thing, right?
Yes, and literally keep the lights on and a roof over the head. In this case, it's everybody's head, right? Yeah.
And this is, again, one of those things, I'm quite fortunate and privileged and that sort of thing. So, the run rate was, or the burn rate, I had enough time but it was an empowering sort of experience to be like, okay, I can go, a long time and still be okay. And, and I said to my wife, who was very, very supportive of me making this big shift, and she was on mat leave, right? So our income was not very great.
Yeah, things were lean. Right? Yeah, no, I get it.
But she was super, super duper supportive of it and that sort of thing. And, but basically and this is why it lends itself more to the maybe mid-career, later career sort of folks, that sort of idea is that, you probably do want a bit of a runway, right? Because it's not going to happen for you overnight. And some things I would say is that basically make sure you have a bit of a burn rate, call it, 3-6 months, without clients potentially, right? And if you can't make it work after 6 months, then maybe consider going back full time. One thing too, to sort of de-risk it in people's minds is that, what's the worst case scenario here? And essentially it's, there's the opportunity cost of, you didn't work a full-time job for 3 or 6 months and you had this experience trying to launch this thing, and then you just go and get another full-time job, right? So we're not building a factory here, right? Like this is like from a capital outlay perspective, it's essentially just opportunity cost is what you're foregoing here. So it's like, it's risky, but it's not that risky. Like, I guess is one thing I would say to people. So, keep that in mind. And one thing as well too is, it took me, I believe it was 2 months to get the first client, right? And the first client's going to be the hardest client to get. So don't think that, it's going to be like this for client 2, client 3, client 4, client 5, right? But sadly, the second client is the second hardest client to get, and that sort of thing, and so forth.
I appreciate
right?
your honesty.
So that's just kind of how it works, right? Because although you've done this stuff in a full-time capacity previously and that sort of thing, you haven't de-risked it for them in terms of you've operated in a fractional way and that sort of idea, right? And what I said to the first company that I collaborated with is, I am going to absolutely kill it for you, really, really do well for you, because I know that I need to do well for you in order to get the next one and in order to get the next one after that.
You're going to get the benefit of being my first case study, so we're going to crush it.
Exactly. And that's what I did. It was essentially a handshake agreement
it's
with them.
It's basically like giving a guarantee without formally structuring it as such, right?
That's basically it, right?
Yeah.
And so basically, like I said to them, and we had a handshake on, essentially, it's like, hey, I'm going to kill it for you, but when I do, I need a case study. Through a case study on my website.
Yep.
I'm going to need you're going to need you to be a reference, testimonial, all that sort of stuff. But, and you know what? Like, it worked out really well and that sort of thing. And I overexpended on them from a time perspective. That's another thing.
You did what needed to be done.
Yeah. To get it done and to be, to be able to hold up this success story in order to de-risk company 2 from saying yes. Right. And that's the idea, is just like, the more you do it, the more you're de-risking that decision, assuming that you're doing a good job and that sort of thing, and those outcomes. And, the vast majority of companies that I've worked with, like of the 14 or whatever, have gone on to raise subsequent rounds of financing at higher valuations or have been acquired
that's a nice legacy. That's a great
favorable
legacy.
Circumstances, right?
Yeah.
So it's that helps to de-risk the decision of another company to say yes, right? And when there are other fractional CMOs that might be talking to these companies that I'm talking to as well, and one of them said earlier this year, it's like, wow, like you're like double the price of these other fractional CMOs. And I'm like, if they've done what I've done in terms of helping out these companies and in this way and getting these outcomes, you should totally go with them. Like that's a fantastic decision.
What a great way to counter that objection.
But if they haven't, then, maybe you might want to think about the investment and the return rather than, the input cost here.
I appreciate that. Well, I feel like I was getting closed right there. I was like, well, he's got a solid point. I can't argue with him. He locked that down. The market booms. People are hiring like crazy, all up and down the scale in the tech world. Does fractional slow down, or is this a journey we're on?
In my mind, the smart companies will leverage fractional and will continue to leverage fractional. And the reason for that is that, the companies that I work with, the ones that, and typically what their journey is that they're either a product-driven organization or a sales-driven organization, and marketing hasn't really been a contributor to sort of financial results to date, right? And so basically, if a company were to, especially on the lower end of that 3 to 8 million, if they were to hire a full-time CMO, that would be just too much executive overhead for them, right? They don't need that.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense. They have to mess with their cap table or the capitalization table, all that sort of stuff. It's a big risk as well, right? In the sense of, is this person going to work out? Is this person not going to work out? As opposed to, hey, this is 12 weeks. It's this, amount of dollars. This person, has been vetted, used, that sort of thing. But just fractional more generally, it's, do you actually need that full-time resource? Or do you need, for example, a fractional CFO with a controller, for example, and that sort of overall investment's lower than getting a CFO and that sort of idea, right? So basically the companies that sort of realize, what are the business goals? what are the best ways to get there? And Fractional's part of the toolkit that they're considering, in addition to, more traditional contractors, FTE, full-time employees, part-time employees, that sort of thing. It's another tool. So why deprive yourself of that tool in your toolkit when you're thinking about getting to those goals?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just, again, more optionality and what's the best fit at the time. That, I love, the short, intense, high power, high yield engagements that we can reassess in 12 weeks and see what it looks like now, and things are going to move on. But through those stages and phases, especially of that scale up, Series B or wherever they might be, depending on the raise and depending on how they're scaling, it does make so much more sense because you need the horsepower. But as a leader, as someone making those decisions, that big salary maybe doesn't make sense. That comes with commitment and risk and a whole bunch of other things. Mm-hmm.
And often enough, basically there's a, sometimes after a discovery, like after that first 4 weeks, I actually identify, and this actually happened in the previous engagement or one of the previous engagements I've had this year, is that, I realized based on business goals, based on where they were as a company, all that sort of stuff, said, hey, let's get a full-time VP of marketing in here. Because that's what the business needed, right? And the thing is, if you're sort of minding your goals and constraints and sort of fitting within that, basically after that, it's all about providing that outsized value. You are being completely selfish for that company that you're working with, even if it means, hey, I'm not going to have a second engagement. And most of the time, I don't have a second engagement. It's one and done, and you're set up for success from a people, process, technology perspective. Cool, go run with it. This is awesome. So that's one of the things that's a bit different between Fractional and sort of other contracted relationships, sometimes agency relationships, that sort of thing. I worked agency side, Tyler, so I'm not poo-pooing that at all. But basically,
we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and it's all balanced. But I really like the altruistic kind of approach you put of I'm very I'm company centric in that way because I'm not planning on staying beyond my engagement. I'm being very black and white. So the credibility of the information that you're giving me. Hey, we've all been in the situation where you're like, hey, this outcome that you found in this audit you did seems very biased towards you. Do I trust this data?
Yeah.
We're coming in going, hey, my agenda is to do the best job I can, and I'm out of here. I'm off to the sunset in 12 weeks. It does the trust matrix has the opportunity to be different.
Yeah, no, it's fun in that way, and basically, and one thing I should mention is my prescription for folks is not 12-week engagements, that sort of thing. That's what fits for my hyper niche and my use case in order to provide that outsized value. That's the shortest amount of time by which I can do that. Okay. Mm-hmm. But let's say your hyper niche is actually, large enterprise clients where you're redesigning data lakes. That's sort of your thing, let's say, is you
12
go
weeks
in.
just gets you up and running.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? So what's right for the company, if you're being selfish for the company, right? And I feel like I'm quoting Office Space here, is this good for the company? Sort of a Lumberg sort of quote. But basically, it might be that your engagement length is a year or something like that in order to rip out what needs to be ripped out and put in what needs to be put in, that sort of idea. The engagement length, the deliverables, how you set it up, all that sort of stuff, that's related to the hyper niche and the only choice value proposition there. So that's kind of the idea, is that, that's driving things and also respecting your constraints as always.
When can I? When's the course going to be ready? It sounds like it's definitely in your head. I feel like we just got a kind of walk through it. Yeah. When is this going to hit the rubber, hit the road, and when are people going to be able to get involved?
So the plan right now is actually mid-May to launch, and
okay, so that's why it sounds as almost baked as it is, because it's getting close. It's almost coming out of the oven.
Yeah, it might get pushed to maybe a week or two or that sort of thing. But yeah, it's coming. It'll most likely be on Maven, the platform. Which a lot of tech courses are on there, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, no, stay tuned on that. But I'm honestly,
well, let us know, because we will definitely send it and promote it to our audience. I think.
No, I appreciate that.
I've had a handful of Fractional, again, you and I at lunch, and it's just at least once a week or every second week, I'm having either a conversation where I'm like, hey, maybe you should consider Fractional from a company perspective, as well as just people that I'm running into that are like, hey, if I looked at my life, this is kind of just what makes sense next. And they tend to be kind of later stage in terms of they've got an eclectic resume that allows them to speak credibly into some different areas, right? Mm.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking forward to getting the word out and that sort of thing. This is actually the first, I'm not sure when this podcast will be released exactly, but it might be the first mention publicly of the podcast.
Oh, that's even better. So let
we'll
me see here. So if everyone's on the edge of their seat, this will probably come out. Well, either way, we're going to make sure it comes. Right now, we're currently May 28th. So this could be your premiere episode for the launch of your course.
Nice.
So if you're listening to this, folks, this could be available right now. So check the link for more information. But we will let's tee that up. So let's talk more about that.
Appreciate that. No, that's good.
Really enjoyed the conversation. I've always enjoyed our chats, and I appreciate the thought that you've brought to it, the fact that you're now sharing that and being a lot more abundant versus scarcity around what you've learned and how you share that with your community, because it does sound like you have the rising tides, lifts all boats kind of mindset. And I really appreciate that, because doing the thing is one thing, taking what you've learned, packaging it in a way that other people can learn from it. Kudos to you. High fives, man. It's awesome.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Really do.
Very cool. Really enjoyable chat. Hey, if people want to learn more, obviously, 80/20. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite form of? Is it carrier pigeon? Is it smoke signals? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Instagram? What's your preferred form of comms?
I mean, probably LinkedIn's probably easiest for folks. So just nice. Michael Gaudet on LinkedIn. But feel free to email me as well, Michael at 8020 CMO. And that's all letters. That's not numbers. .com.
Good to clarify. Yeah. And and I'm checking out your website. You've got some great case studies on here. So yeah, go check it out if you're looking, or if you're thinking about doing it. I think you've created a great example of what success looks like. Well done.
Thanks, man. No, I appreciate it. And appreciate you having me on. Really means a lot to me.
Oh, thanks, man. It was my pleasure. As my audience knows, I do this if nobody listens, because I love having these conversations. But luckily they do listen, which somehow justifies my hobby. Michael, thanks for coming on, man. It was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.